In 2001, five girls, Maya, Chloe, Lily, Jasmine, and Olivia, believed their dreams were written in harmony. At Westlake Elementary, they weren't just friends. They were the Starlights, a singing group with matching purple vests and a shared ambition to sing on bigger stages. They practiced in Maya's garage, their voices blending into something that felt like magic. They even recorded a demo on a small handheld recorder, their first real step toward a future filled with bright lights and applause. One blustery spring afternoon, that future was supposed to begin. A local music producer had heard their demo and arranged to meet them. The plan was simple. The five girls would meet their school music teacher, Mr. Harrison, outside the school auditorium. He had arranged a van to take them to the producer's downtown office. They waited, their nervous energy a mixture of jitters and excitement. The van was running late, but they were used to waiting, to dreaming, to hoping. Then the van pulled up. It was a nondescript white van, not the school's usual transport. But the man inside smiled and waved. The girls, eager to get to their meeting, piled in. The last thing anyone remembered was the van pulling away from the curb. Only the van never arrived at the producer's office. The girls never showed up. Mr. Harrison called the police, frantic. The official report stated the van never showed up at the school, that the girls must have gotten into a different vehicle, but a few students claimed they saw a white van pull away, and a teacher remembered seeing five girls getting into a vehicle. That was not the school's, but with no solid evidence, no CCTV footage, and no leads, the case went cold. The Starlights became a ghost story, their once vibrant dreams replaced by a profound and painful silence. 10 years passed. The world moved on, but for the families of the Starlights, time had stopped. Their photographs, once bursting with life, now looked like portraits of ghosts. Then in 2011, a package arrived at the desk of Sarah Jenkins, an investigative reporter known for her relentless pursuit of cold cases. It was a small plain cardboard box with no return address, wrapped in brown paper. Inside, nestled in shredded newspaper, was a single mini DV tape. Sarah's heart pounded as she read the label. Scrawled in shaky, uneven handwriting, "We are still here." Sarah stared at the tape, the words a jolt of ice in her veins. "We are still here." It was both a message and a mystery. The Starlights case was a phantom she'd chased for years, a file tucked away in a drawer with all the other cold trails. It was a story everyone knew, a local legend of five girls who had simply disappeared, their dreams dissolving into thin air. She went straight to her desk, her hands trembling as she inserted the mini DV tape into a vintage player she kept for just such occasions. The screen flickered to life. The first few moments were a distorted mess of static, a kaleidoscope of colors that made her head hurt. Then the image resolved and her breath hitched. The footage was shaky, shot from a low angle. The background was a blur of concrete and shadow, but the faces were unmistakable. They were older, their youthful innocence replaced by a tired resignation. But they were the Starlights. There was Lily, her once bright eyes now distant and guarded. Jasmine, her smile gone, replaced by a grim set to her jaw. And then the others, Chloe, Maya, and Olivia, all looking directly into the camera. Their expressions unreadable. They didn't speak. They simply stared, their silence more chilling than any scream. Suddenly, a voice, raspy and barely a whisper, broke the stillness. It wasn't one of the girls. It was a man, his words distorted by the poor quality of the recording. "The song is not over," he said. "It has just begun. We've been waiting for someone to listen. This is the first verse." The camera tilted down, showing a single bare foot on a cold concrete floor. The silence stretched, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Then the video cut out, the screen returning to a wash of static. Sarah rewound the tape, watching it again and again, her reporter's mind working furiously. The concrete, the shadows, the man's voice, and the girls' faces, their silent plea. This wasn't a hoax. This was real. But what was the first verse? And where were they? She knew she had to find them, to unravel the secret of their decade-long disappearance. The Starlights story wasn't over. It had just been waiting for an audience, and Sarah Jenkins had just been given the front row seat. Sarah sat back in her chair, the silence of her office feeling more suffocating than ever. The tape was an invitation, a taunt, and a plea all at once. The message was clear, someone wanted her to find them. But who and why now? Her first instinct was to go to the police, but her gut told her that was a mistake. The original investigation had been a dead end. full of conflicting reports and closed doors. This was personal now, a puzzle box handed directly to her. If she went public, the person who sent the tape might disappear back into the shadows. She had to figure out what the first verse meant. She looked at the faces on the screen again. The girls were a little older, a little worn, but they were still them. They hadn't screamed or pleaded for help. Their silence was the most unsettling part of all. It was a practiced, disciplined silence, as if they had been trained to not make a sound. Sarah pulled up the cold case file on her computer. The Starlights. She had spent years poring over these documents. The police report, the witness statements, the dead ends. Mr. Harrison, the music teacher, had been cleared after a brief investigation. The van had been a ghost, a vehicle that existed only in the hazy memories of witnesses. The families had held out hope for years, but eventually, the missing persons flyers faded and the memorials grew quiet. She decided to start with the voices. The man's voice from the tape was a long shot, but she had to try. She used a simple audio analysis program to isolate the man's words, trying to filter out the static and distortion. The song is not over. It has just begun. We've been waiting for someone to listen. This is the first verse. The voice was low with a faint, gravelly quality. There was no accent she could place. Her next thought was the video. The shaky, low-angle shot. The concrete floor, the foot. It was a minimalist set, but to Sarah it felt loaded with clues. The lighting was dim, suggesting an indoor location. Perhaps a basement, a warehouse, or an abandoned building. The concrete floor was pitted and stained, and a faint shadow of what looked like a pipe ran across the top of the frame. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sarah knew this was her chance. Not just to break a story, but to find 5 women who had been lost for a decade. She felt a connection to them, a shared secret that only she and the sender of the tape knew. She wasn't just a reporter anymore. She was their only hope. The next morning, Sarah got another package. This one was even smaller. Inside was a single cassette tape. On the label, in the same shaky handwriting, were 3 simple words, the second verse. Sarah held the small cassette tape, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The second verse. The message was a chilling echo of the last one. The sender was playing a game, a morbid melody with the Starlights as the instruments. Sarah had to find out what song they were singing. She rushed back to her office, the tape feeling heavy and cold in her hand. Her vintage cassette player, a relic from a forgotten era, clicked and whirred as she pressed play. A low, haunting hum filled the room. It was a single, sustained note, a low C, but beneath it, barely audible, were whispers, a cacophony of quiet voices overlapping and indistinct. Sarah leaned in, turning up the volume. She could make out a few words here and there. A cold, hunger, forgotten. Then the whispers ceased and a single voice emerged. It was a girl's voice, soft and breathy, singing a single line, barely more than a murmur. We live in the shadow of the setting sun. The voice was unmistakably Lily's. Sarah knew from the demo tape. She'd listened to countless times in the cold case file. The song was familiar, a folk tune that had been popular around the time the girls disappeared. It was a simple line, but its meaning felt profound. A setting sun, the end of the day, the end of hope, the end of a long-lost dream. The tape ended there with the single line of song and a return to the low hum. Sarah rewound it, listening again. The hum was a strange sound. It didn't sound like a machine. It was a steady rhythmic thrum, almost like a fan or a generator. It was another small clue, another piece of the puzzle. She had to go back to the first tape. The man's voice. The concrete floor. The Starlight's silent faces. She had to analyze every tiny detail. The concrete floor on the first tape was stained with a dark substance, maybe oil, maybe something else. There were also faint markings on the wall behind them, like old faded graffiti. And the man's voice. She had taken the audio to a sound engineer, a favor she'd called in from a contact. He had given her a few possibilities, but no solid answers. The voice had a slight echo, suggesting a large open space. The engineer also noted a faint, secondary hum beneath the man's voice, the same low thrum she'd just heard on the second tape. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. The pieces were starting to connect. The verses were a coded message, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the Starlight's location. The song was the key. She spent the next few hours cross-referencing every folk song she could find from the early 2000s, looking for one with a line about the setting sun. Her search led her to an obscure B-side from a forgotten album, a song called The Long Road Home. She played the song, her heart pounding. The lyrics were a mournful tale of a traveler lost and alone. And there it was, the third verse. I follow the hum of the city's heart, a silent guide through the dark. The hum, the city's heart, a silent guide. It all clicked. The hum wasn't just background noise. It was a clue. The sender was leading her to a location, a place where a steady, rhythmic hum could be heard. The hum of a city's heart. Sarah knew what she had to do. She had to find the source of that hum. The first step was to go back to her old notes and a map of the city. She would not stop until she found her final verse. Sarah stood over the city map, a red pen in her hand, marking every known source of a sustained, low hum. Power plants were the obvious candidates, but their hums were too high frequency. A technological drone, not the earthy, rhythmic thrum she'd heard on the tapes. She moved on to industrial zones, marking old factories, forgotten train depots, and abandoned warehouses. The city's heart lyric from the song echoed in her mind. The phrase implied a central, essential location, a place that was once vital to the city's function, now perhaps discarded. She narrowed her focus to a cluster of old textile factories near the river, a district that had been a bustling hub decades ago but now lay in disuse. One particular building stood out, the old Sewell & Sons textile mill. It had been abandoned for over 15 years. The site was massive, a sprawling complex of red brick and broken windows. Locals whispered that the original owners had built a self-sufficient power grid on the site, a generator so large it could power the entire compound. The hum from that old generator would fit the bill. The next package arrived, slipped under her office door, a third verse in a song of despair. It was another mini DV tape. On the label, the handwriting was shakier than before, almost frantic, the final verse. Sarah's hand shook as she put the tape in the player. The video was dark, almost black, but she could make out a faint silhouette of the girls. They were standing closer together, their faces a blur of shadow. Then the camera panned down to their feet. This time, they were not on cold concrete. They were standing on a floor with a distinctive pattern. It was a tiled floor, but not uniform. A series of hexagonal tiles, some cracked, some missing, forming a faint honeycomb pattern. The voice was back, the same gravelly whisper. But this time, it wasn't a verse. It was a directive. You've followed the song. You've heard our harmony. Now it is your turn to sing, the voice said. The song is not a melody. It is a map. The first verse was the concrete, the foundation. The second was the hum, the lifeblood. And this, the final verse, is the honeycomb. It shows you the way. The video ended. Sarah was certain. The Sewell & Sons textile mill was the place. She had researched its history years ago. The factory floor had been known for its unique hexagonal tile patterns, a signature of the original architect, long since forgotten. The pattern on the video, the low hum, the concrete foundation, it all pointed to one place. She knew she couldn't go to the police yet. If she was wrong, she would lose their trust. And if she was right, the kidnapper would be tipped off, and the Starlights would be moved. She had to go alone. That night, as the moon rose over the city, casting long shadows on the abandoned streets, Sarah drove toward the old textile mill. Her heart was a drum, each beat a syncopated rhythm to the low, steady hum she was now certain she could hear in the night air. She wasn't just a reporter chasing a story anymore. She was a hero walking into a trap, armed with nothing but a song and a map. The rusty chain on the main gate of the Sewell & Sons textile mill rattled as Sarah broke the lock. The air was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. As she stepped onto the property, the low, rhythmic hum she'd been hearing on the tapes grew louder, a deep thrum that vibrated through her shoes and up her spine. It was the city's heart from the song, a silent guide through the dark. She found the main building, a monstrous brick shell with shattered windows. Using the flashlight on her phone, she found the main entrance. The door was heavy and it groaned on its hinges, revealing a dark, cavernous space. The low hum was deafening now. Her light swept over the room, revealing huge, looming machinery shrouded in cobwebs. This was it, the concrete floor from the first tape. She moved deeper, her heart pounding. The hum led her to a set of stairs leading down, to a basement level. The air grew colder, the hum more intense. She descended one careful step at a time, the beam of her light dancing on the walls. At the bottom, she found a door. It was bolted from the outside. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled on the bolts. The lock gave way with a sickening clank. As the door swung open, the light from her phone illuminated the room. It was smaller than the main factory floor, but it was there. The hexagonal tiled floor from the final tape. This was the honeycomb. The hum was coming from a massive, archaic-looking generator in the corner of the room, a beast of steel and wires that was rumbling with life. But her eyes were not on the machine. They were on the 5 figures huddled together in the center of the room. They were older, their faces etched with a decade of fear and despair. But they were the Starlights. They were still there. As she stepped into the room, a shadow detached itself from the wall near the generator. A man's voice, the same gravelly whisper from the tapes, echoed in the room. "I knew you would follow the song," he said. "A perfect harmony must have a perfect audience." The man stepped into the light. He was older, his face gaunt, his eyes wild with a strange mania. But Sarah knew him. He was a local handyman who had done odd jobs for the school. He had been a peripheral figure in the original case, a witness who claimed to have seen nothing. He had created his own stage for the Starlights, a perfect, isolated world where their song would only ever be for him. "I brought them here to protect them," he said, his voice a frantic whisper. The world was too loud, too unappreciative. They had to be silent so their song could be preserved. The Starlights said nothing, their eyes fixed on Sarah. They were not just trapped. They were broken, their spirits extinguished by 10 years of isolation and control. But in that moment, a flicker of defiance sparked in Lily's eyes. She took a step forward. "The song isn't for you," she said, her voice a cracked whisper from disuse. "It's for the world. It's for all the girls who dream." The man lunged forward, but Sarah was faster. She had come prepared. Her phone not just for light, but for a call she was already making to the police. Her location already pinging the tower. She had found her final verse. As the sirens wailed in the distance, a sound more beautiful than any melody she had ever heard. Sarah watched as the Starlights looked at each other. They were still here, and finally their song could be heard.